Hey, what's happening, James?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, how are you?
Okay. Oh, now you can hear me. Okay, I guess you got my
Good,
headset. I
good,
thought it was my speakers. I just found a screenshot of our website.
good.
I'm
There's
just glad
there's some other folks here, so just letting you know.
Okay. It's like I don't know where my backgrounds go,
Yeah.
dude. All right.
All right, I'm gonna get started in a minute or so. I just want to let everybody get in and give them another minute, and then we'll get started.
Fantastic.
I pushed it up 5 minutes because my lawn guy showed up about
Ah,
10 minutes
of
ago, and he was
course.
mowing right outside of my window. So,
Of course.
all right,
Yeah, can you hear me now?
we hear you. We hear you.
Okay.
All right, let's get rocking and rolling. I know people are going to come and go throughout the session. So, my name is Mark Turkel, and thanks for coming. Below me is my partner James Wright, and he's going to be watching the questions come through and everything, and he'll pop in and interrupt me when there's something pertinent to discuss. And if we don't answer your question right away, we're live. I'll stick around as long as there's a bunch of people here, and happy to answer everybody's questions. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn James off, and James, we'll see you in a little bit. And I will get started with the show. So welcome everybody. Um, Thanks for coming to the live webinar. I really got a content rich presentation for you today, so I don't want to waste a lot of time with long introductions because I respect everybody's time. We'll be monitoring your questions in the chat window, and please know that if I don't stop during the presentation to answer every question, I'll hang around for a while afterwards as long as people stick around, and I'm happy to answer questions. This is what I do for a living, and I love it, so I'm happy to talk about it. Today, we're going to talk about software projects, the sales process, contract tips and tricks and traps. Talk about the project plan. We're going to talk about project management 101 for those who haven't seen project management yet. And of course, we'll do some Q&A at the end. My name is Mark Turkel, and I'm the founder and CEO of Palm Beach Software Design. I'm also a software architect, and I'm still very involved in the initial phases of software development projects for discovery, especially to make sure that we understand your goals and requirements and that we create a great plan that leads to successful outcomes for our projects. We've been in business for over 36 years now, and I've developed some really good processes, policies, and procedures, along with my partner, James, who's with us. And I want to share them with you. So that's part of why we're doing this here. It's time to give a little bit back to the community. So hopefully I can help out, and let's rock and roll. In this hour, we're going to talk about several topics that will help you understand the workings of a software development project. And we're going to look at things from both the customer's perspective and also from the developer's perspective so that you can fully understand how things work and how to optimize the experience with your development team. Today, we're going to learn about what to expect in the sales process, caveats to watch for in contracts and work orders, how to develop working specifications, the software development life cycle, and how to read and understand the project plan. Some of the things we're not going to talk about today, but I will talk about in the future, is how to run a technical meeting, how to keep momentum going in your project, how to manage both internal and external teams. We'll do some checklists for each of the steps in the development process. We'll talk about how to protect your project from problem developers and how to get your project back on track after a setback. So stay tuned. We're going to have a lot of good content coming, and hope I can educate everybody out there on custom software development and how it works and how you can leverage it the best for your company. Most of the information I'm going over today is covered in my book, Software Development Playbook. You can find it on Amazon, And you can also scan the QR code at the bottom of the screen to go right to a link. If you do have Kindle Unlimited, the book is offered for free. If you want it in print, well, we got to pay for it, but that's how it goes. My book was created to empower business owners, C-level executives, stakeholders, project managers, and anybody else who's really involved in a software project that has never done it before or would like to do it better. Today, we're going to learn about the software development life cycle, how to ask the right questions, and other things that you need to know to make sure you have a successful solution that makes your business run better and doesn't run you broke in the process. So let's talk about the software development sales process, because that's where everything starts, right? A software development project, it's a big deal. It's a lot of work. There's a lot of risk involved. There's a lot of people involved. You got developers, end users, stakeholders. There's a lot of planning and management that has to happen. Money, responsibility, and the return on your investment are all real concerns. And in a lot of cases, you may feel like your job's on the line with this, or your company's on the line. So it's very important that we get it right. Your reputation, money, time, and businesses, your business is on the line. This is real stress. So I want to acknowledge that it can be a scary process. And I'm glad you're here, because hopefully I can let you know what to expect and help you ensure some success. So let's dive into the sales process a little bit more. There's always two sides to a deal, the customer side and the service provider side. Having an understanding of the other side will allow you to define and negotiate the project better. There's some things that you should do prior to meeting with your development team so that you can give them the information that they need to be able to understand the problems and challenges you're trying to solve. We need to define the problems and challenges that you're trying to solve as a business and what those issues are, including compliance issues, business rules, laws, constraints, due dates, things like that the developer needs to know about. We also want to take the time to prioritize the features and functionalities that you require, because your budget may not be enough to do everything. So if you prioritize the features that are most important and most critical for your mission, the developer can work with that knowledge and your budget to get to where you need to be. I'm going to go against the most common rules of negotiations here and tell you that the developer needs to know how much money you have to spend. I don't know how else to say it, but straight out. If we know your budget, we can fit your requirements into that budget by adding or removing certain features or doing other things along the way to make it fit. So it's to your best benefit to at least give the development company you're talking to some kind of budget range. I can spend from $60,000 to $80,000, and that gives us a good idea of how deep we need to go into different things. And based on what we discover, which we'll talk about next, we'll be able to figure out the right features and things to put into the program to get it up and running, solve the immediate problems. Then if we have to come back and add some more later, we can. But it's important that you, on your side, before you even meet with the developers, understand what your problem is, document it, and say, my problem is this. Because during the meetings, people will forget why you're there and things can run amok. So define the problems, prioritize what you need, discuss your budget. In the sales process, it takes both the client and the developer to come together to create a software project. The developer's process looks kind of like this. They're going to meet you and get an overview of the problems and challenges that you need to solve. And they'll get the details, and they'll find out what the pain and suffering is all about, or what the new compliance laws you have to deal with are, or just changes in your company or work process. And you'll describe that as best you can to them so that they can build the right solutions for you. They're going to meet with you to get an overview of all these problems and challenges that you need to solve. And then they'll leave and sit down with their group and do a bit of a needs analysis based on experience and what we've done in the past, and other factors that come in that the seniors can help add to the development process to help guesstimate a ballpark price for you based on the limited information you gave them. And I'm using the word guesstimate, which is not a real word, but we use it a lot because we don't always know the exact amounts of time it's going to take to build something. And at this point in the game, we really don't know all the details of how things need to work and how your business flows, how communication flows, and things like that. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. But the next thing I want to talk about is, why did I say to expose your budget, and why is that a good thing? So let's talk about that first. And, like I said, you should reveal your budget for a couple of good reasons. Let's make sure that the development team has realistic expectations. When the developers know your budget, they can limit the features to fit your budget. And that's an important thing to remember, because we're going to talk about scope creep in the future, but it's very easy during meetings, especially during discovery, when we're talking and learning about your business and asking lots of questions, to forget the main problems we're trying to solve and start talking about all the problems. So we want to make sure that you prioritize your features. Developers can get the more important features into the budget first. We want to avoid surprises. Developers will avoid proposing solutions outside of your budget if they know what the budget is. So, if you're talking about a simple system that maybe in your mind is $5 or $10 or $20,000, the developer may be thinking $100,000. So, and it's very possible that your application can go there as soon as you add in mobile and desktop and other features and functionality, it can go. So you want to avoid any surprises, and telling them your budget really will solve a lot of problems down the road. You want to maximize your value. Developers will always find a creative solution to fit within your budget because they want to do the work. And that's the bottom line. We like programming as developers. A new programming challenge is awesome, and we want to make it happen. We want to learn something along the way, and of course, we want to see your business do really well and flourish and be the heroes. So it's important to, you're going to be telling them everything else about your business. You might as well tell them your budget and make sure that the project goes smoothly. What's next? Well, the developer will give you a ballpark estimate. It's usually going to be a range. It's going to be between $100,000 and $125,000, or it'll be between 20 and 50, whatever the price range is. They're going to give you a range, and there's a reason for that. The reason is we haven't really done this deep study to understand what we need to build in a task by task manner. So from the development side, we normally want to have the big picture of what we want to do, and then we break it down for our development team into tasks and modules so that they know what they need to build when and how it's going to happen. We need to do discovery, and that's really the big first step in the project, which is your first go, no-go decision. So we need to do discovery, and what we end up creating is what's called a scope and requirements document. And I'll talk a little bit about that coming right up. So let's talk about the discovery process. The discovery process is where you get to tell a development team about your company, the problems that they need to solve, and what you need from this project. And I'm going to just read the bullets because they're important. The scope and requirements is a discovery and a report about your business. So it should start out with a project summary narrative that talks about your business, what it does, what the problems that it's dealing with now, and the highest level proposed solution. We're planning on doing to fix these problems. And that gets listed out further below in the document as we start talking about your project goals, compliance issues, laws, other things that you have no choice in dealing with. Business workflow, how do you do it, and how does data and information move through your company, and how do you support your customers, etc. We talk about communications. How do you talk to your customers? How do you talk to your internal people? Is it by email? Is it by text message? Do we just pick up the phone and call? All these things get considered when we're building software because we want to streamline your process. We'll also talk about the technology platform. And these days there's a couple of different platforms that software is built on. One is the Microsoft platform, where you have all the .NET stuff, and I'm sure everybody's heard of .NET. And then the other side of the coin is the LAMP stack, where you have a Linux type of server that hosts WordPress websites and other PHP applications as well. They're both very popular. They both have pluses and minuses, and some development companies have a preference to where they want to work, and some don't. So you need to, if you have something already set up in your office, it's important to let your development company know, hey, we're on LAMP stack, or hey, we're a Microsoft house. We use Outlook and we use these things, as opposed to LAMP stack, where I'm on Gmail and the Google Suite, for example. The more information we know, the better of a solution we can build for you. So we also want to talk about the business pains and bottlenecks. Okay, what causes customers to get upset? What causes employees to get upset? What is the things that people always say, God, if we did this, it would be so much faster. So we talk about that a lot, because while we're building the software, we can find solutions for these small problems. Finally, we talk about risks and the return on your investment. There's always risk involved, as everybody knows, and projects do fail. And we'll talk about why they fail in just a moment, but there are risks, and I want to acknowledge that, because like I said in the beginning, it can be a very scary thing, especially for a small business that's building software for the very first time. It's a big investment. They may not know what to do. They may have not been in this situation before, and that's what this webinar is all about. I'm trying to give you best practices that should be happening with your development team, whether they're internal or external. I hope you grab the best practices from this and it works out well. All right, back to the discovery process. The discovery process, again, is where the client developer work together to understand how your company works, so that the issues and challenges make sense. The developer needs to understand everything about your process, the communication, the bookkeeping, business rules, compliance items, how you accomplish these tasks now, unless it's completely new to the business, and obviously your vision and dreams and goals for how you would like to accomplish tasks with software to help out. The details are really important as we move into the specifications for the project documentation. So once discovery is done, we create a detailed scope and requirements document, and that really comes next. So for us, at my company at least, the scope and requirements documentation is the first real sprint in the project, which is to define the project itself. So if, let's say we're talking about a home, I want to build a house, I got $450,000 to do it with. Now let's sit down and design it. Let's build the blueprints. Let's understand how it's going to work, the structure, how many bathrooms, how many bedrooms, where the walls are going to go, and so on and so forth. And then the construction people, or the developers in our case, can sit down and start building things out. But they need specifications, and that's what the scope and requirements is all about. So the scope and requirements documentation normally should include, like I said, the project summary narrative, business requirements, business rules, including operational rules and any compliance items, communications, screen mockups, data and reporting, and a discussion of the workflow. The scope and requirements documentation breaks down all the screens, the data elements, and the working tasks to make this dream come to life. Once we break things down into single tasks, we can then figure out how long this, how long it should take to finish, as well as a checklist to use to make sure the software is functioning correctly. We consider the following items consulting or development: coding, review meetings, design meetings, testing, and simple revisions when we provide our firm estimate at the conclusion of the scope and requirements study. So in other words, we build out the scope, and this is a billable item because it takes a while and it's a lot of work, but it's the blueprints for everything. And from these blueprints, we can sit down and build a project plan and a timeline and give you a real estimate on cost and delivery date. The scope and requirements documentation should also include the scope and requirements document itself, screen and application mockups, a project plan with milestones, QA, quality assurance test plans for unit testing, and a work order or a contract for the development work with all the known costs clearly defined. Some companies actually will propose their support plan at the same time, which I think is really great. I'd like to know everything up front. So these are things that you should be expecting from your development company, should demand from them, and it needs to happen before code's written. When we talk about software development, we're talking about a cycle of work to get the program ready to use. Whether you're talking about an entire program, a feature, a screen, these 5 tasks and these bubbles on the screen here, excuse me, will always happen. Well, they should happen, okay? There's 5 main segments to the software development lifecycle. It's research and analysis, scope and requirements, programming and coding, QA, quality assurance and testing, and of course, technical documentation. And it just makes sense to think that when there's a change in any one of these things, they all get affected. If we make a programming change, it's smart to update documentation. It's smart to update the scope. We may or may not have to do research and analysis, but we definitely need to test it afterwards. So things that may look small end up being a little bit more work behind the scenes than you might know. When we perform a task, all these things should always happen. This means that anytime you ask a developer for a little tiny change, that you need to remember there's more steps here than just changing something and moving on. There's so many times where I get a client that says, can you move a button from here to here? And of course, we're always going to say yes, because we can. But when we move that button from here to here, it may be perfect on a desktop, but then we need to go test it on a phone and a tablet. And as you can start seeing, a little change really has bigger implications on the back end for testing and, of course, updating the documentation and that kind of thing. So please remember, when you're asking a developer to do something, they're always going to say, sure, of course I'll do it. But as we'll discuss in the future and coming up, it's important to get a quote for changes, okay? Because it is going to take time and it will delay the due date. Most companies don't provide fixed price development costs except for the smallest and most finite applications. If somebody calls me up and says, hey, I need a tic-tac-toe application and I want you to publish it to the App Store for Android and iOS, I can pretty much give them an exact quote and say, I'll do it for this much money, because I understand the rules to tic-tac-toe. I know all the options that can happen, and it's a very finite scenario. When we start talking about your business, it's a whole different ballpark. We're in a much bigger scenario because everything we do might affect your business in some way. So it's just an estimate for a couple of reasons. One is we don't always know everything, and sometimes even after our discovery and scope of requirements process, it'll pop up and say, oh, I forgot there's this law that means we have to do X, Y, and Z and make these calculations before we ship off our product. Well, that kind of thing happens all the time, and it's not at anybody's fault, but part of what we're doing here is trying to prepare you to think of these things so they don't pop up later, but they do. And that's why you get, from most companies, just an estimate as opposed to a fixed price. Now, we provide, at my company, we've been doing this for 36 years. So I'll let you know how we do it. And it's not how everybody does it, but it works for us. We meet with the client. We don't charge them anything for the first meeting or so. We find out what they need to do. We look back and we talk and we decide we think it's going to be between this much and this much. And we provide that to the client as the first decision that they need to make is, do they want to move forward based on what we're guessing right now? And if they do, we move right into the scope of work where we can actually sit down and define everything. And once we do that, I can give a much more firm estimate because at this point I've defined the screens. I know what the database looks like. I know what the operations have to do. I know the communications. I know the way things need to work together. And I have everything broken down into individual tasks where I know how long it's going to take the developer to do. So pardon me, I got to turn on my fan. So I can give you a much better estimate with a timeline and a schedule and everything else once the scope is done. So that's why we always do the scope first. It's the most important thing. And once we're done with the scope, we go through it one more time and we provide a firm estimate based on everything we now know. I hope that makes sense. And real quick, I want to talk about why projects fail. We have been very lucky over the last, well, not, I won't say lucky. We've come up with good policies and procedures over the last, I don't know, 25, 30 years of doing business that helped us make sure that we don't fail. And I actually outlined all that in my book, Software Development Playbook, which this is all based upon. So I'll tell you how to get that a little bit later, but I want to talk about why projects fail because that's one of our sources of new business is people come to us after a project fails and they say, Mark, can you help us? Or James, can you help us? And of course we can. They fail because of poor project management. That's the number one. It can include a lack of clear goals, insufficient planning, inadequate resources, and ineffective communication among team members. Another failure reason is unrealistic expectations with the client. Sometimes clients or stakeholders have unrealistic expectations about what can be achieved within a given time frame or budget. It's really important that your programming team is comfortable enough to push back and make sure that the expectations are realistic. So I have one client who we've been working with forever who kind of knows how long it takes us to do things. And we always go through a little banter back and forth. And, you know, in some cases, you know, they push hard enough and I say, you know what, you're right. We've done that before. We know what to do. And in other cases, I'll push back and say, you know, it's similar to what we did, but we have this other part that we've never done before for any other project, and we just don't know. So it's important to have this open communication. It should be okay to push a little bit in each direction to make sure we're doing the right things. But managing the client's expectations is probably the number 2 reason why projects fail. The third one, and that's also a biggie, is inadequate testing. When software is not thoroughly tested, bugs and other issues go unnoticed until they become major problems. In other words, your development team is kind of relying on you to do the final testing before you put it out there. And at first it might seem like a good idea, but after a couple of weeks of doing that, they start coming back and say, you know, you should be doing this testing. You're not catching the things that are very obvious here, and it starts creating a little bit of animosity. So in my case, about 20 years ago, we ran into that very situation, and that was the time that we made the decision to build our quality assurance department and have everything tested before it leaves the office. And yes, it did increase the price of the customer's software, but it cut down on all the redos, the debugging, the aggravation, and the embarrassment sometimes when they would roll it out and tell their customer or client, hey, it's good, go ahead, and then it breaks. So inadequate testing is a biggie, and it's not something that should be the first thing chopped out when you're looking to save on your budget. What you should chop out if you're looking to save on budget are features, not testing. The next thing is poorly defined requirements. When requirements are unclear or poorly defined, it leads to misunderstandings and miscommunications between the development team and the project stakeholders. And once that starts, it's a downward slope and it's very hard to turn things around, which is why we've come to the process and procedure of not doing anything without a well-defined scope and requirements, because now it's in black and white. They can see it, touch it, it's there, and in fact they can sign off on it, which is something we ask our clients to do. The last thing is an undefined budget. The budget needs to be defined in order to get a realistic solution to satisfy your requirements. Unless you're a super rich company and say, you know what, take as much money as you need and just get it right, which rarely happens, your budget directly determines the amount of features that can be delivered. So again, we get back to defining the budget. It's really important because you do want to cross the finish line and make sure that the software does what everybody expected it to do. All right, so this is a good time for me to talk about my special masterclass workshop offer. For those of you that may not be able to stay to the end of the day, I just wanted to get this in now. I hope you guys have a better understanding of why presenting the development team with all the information you can will help your project succeed and stay within the timeline and budget. Everybody wants the best price, the shortest timeline, the least amount of uh-ohs and redos because of a lack of understanding. So to me, discovery is probably one of the most important parts of the project. Of course, we have to do the coding and get it right, but discovery is the important part. I put together this master class workshop to teach you how to gather the discovery information the development team needs to build a good scope and give you a rock solid estimate on cost. You can save your company a lot of money by being proactive in the discovery phase by presenting the team with everything rather than having them spend days or weeks or months figuring out how your company works and what you need them to do for you. In this workshop, you're going to learn how to do the discovery work just like we do at Palm Beach Software Design. You'll define the goals, the features, and the workflows, and this gives your team a huge advantage. Your project is going to start faster. With all the speed bumps and roadblocks out of the way, you'll be ready to rock and roll. A good discovery phase will save money and time by preventing misunderstandings, eliminating the redos, and giving the developers a complete understanding of the business. And I got to say, as a sidebar, the more the developers know, the more they buy in and really own the project, and that's important. Excuse me. My formula works. I've been doing it this way for 36 years. I got a perfect track record of delivering software on time and on budget over and over again. And yeah, I'm really proud about that. But after all this time, I want to share my successful methods with you. So go ahead, scan the code right there. Or James, if you could pop up the link real quick. There's 2 master classes each month until the end of the year, morning and afternoon sessions for the folks out west. You can pick out the time when you want to schedule, and of course you can reschedule if necessary. Our regular price to do this is normally $14.99. Today only, I'm giving you 30% off, but you have to sign up by midnight tonight. Save $450, work directly with James and I, and we will make sure you get the right start for your project. Scan the code on the bottom of the screen and get our exclusive webinar special sign-up page. This web address is also here on the screen. Let me pop it up for you. Give me 1 second. Sorry, guys. Hang on. Here we go. James already got it for me. I'm sorry. Okay, James, I'm not watching, so you got to let me know. Okay. Anyway, go ahead, go to the link, sign up, scan the code on the screen. I'm done selling. I would like to help you. Let's move on. Thank you. All right. Let's talk about contract tips and traps. Okay. Let me bear with me for 1 second. I have a disclaimer to share with you. There it is. Okay. I am not an attorney. My advice is only based on my personal experience, and I cannot be held responsible or liable for your legal documents or decisions in any way. Okay, so now I'm going to tell you what I know based on experience. Inside your contract, there's some must-have items that you need to see. You want a terms of service, a TOS. This defines exactly the scope of services to be expected from each party. Describe the work, the workers, what is billable over and above the contract, etc. We call it a work order. There's terms of service, there's terms of compensation. How will you be expected to be paid? What's the frequency? What's your terms for late payment? What happens if they don't pay? How do you resolve your issues? Support. Is support clearly defined yet? Like I said, in my company, we define the first year support for success right with the project, because I know how much the project costs, and support is always a factor based on the project. So I want to get that out in front of the client, because to me, the first year is the most important, and I want to be there 24/7, 365 once the software rolls out. So if there's a problem, we're here for you. So support is important, at least in the first year. What happens with a breach of contract? And this one I'm going to say, let your attorney deal with this one, because this is going to be different for every contract and every company. So what I can say is make sure that it's addressed, that if somebody wants to get out of the contract, they know what to do, how to do it, and what are the remedies in case they breach the contract without going through the proper procedures. Non-compete, and this is a touchy area and may infringe on the developer's ability to provide services. So a company like mine, I've been around for about 36 years now. It's very, very hard for me to sign a non-compete agreement. I have no problem keeping your secrets to my death in a non-disclosure, but when it comes to non-compete, it's very hard because we build software for everybody. So a lot of times when a client asks me to sign a non-compete, I say no, and sometimes they get it and sometimes they don't. But at the end of the day, you got to be careful not to lock the programmer down, so that if he does a job for you in the aviation industry, that your non-compete says you can't work for anybody else in the aviation industry, because it's just a horrible way, and you don't want to do that. Third-party controls, third-party code, third-party anything. Be aware that there might be additional licensing obligations for certain components in your software. For example, we build a lot of Microsoft .NET applications that use Microsoft SQL Server in the background, and your server needs to have it, and that comes with a price. It's not for me, it's for Microsoft, but it's important to understand these other additional fees, like hosting, like any third-party controls, plugins, things like that. Whatever else there might be licensing for, make sure you know that and it's clear and upfront. And finally, not finally, one more thing: patents, copyrights, and things like that. Make sure you have a clear understanding of ownership of the finished product and the source code, and who owns it, who controls it, and so on. Before the software is built at the contract time, because the last thing you want is to pay for a software company to develop software that they're going to go out and resell to someone else. If you do patent, be aware that you have to defend the patent, and your attorney can tell you all about that. But what you should always do is file a copyright with the Library of Congress. That's easy. I do that for us all the time, and it's filling out a couple of forms online. It's not rocket science, and make sure that you own the copyright on your software. Finally, safety net. Does your external developer carry errors and omissions insurance to guarantee your investment? And it's an interesting thing to talk about, and I never carried that insurance until we started doing government work. So we do some work for the Department of Health, for example, and the government actually requires that we carry this errors and omissions policy. So if they pay us and we don't deliver, that they have some sort of recourse should we do something dirty or bad. And we don't do that. And I've never used the insurance, but it's a nice thing to have. And it's a nice thing to know that the company that you're hiring has. So if God forbid they don't finish or they go out of business or something terrible happens, you don't lose your entire investment. So there is a safety net, and it's called errors and omissions, and that's something your development company should carry. All right. Let's talk about the project plan. The project plan is one of the children documents from the scope and requirements documentation. The purpose of the project plan is to show who does what when, combine the tasks, resources, and a schedule in a visual setting, illustrate critical tasks, and provide a timeline of who's doing the work when. Okay, so this slide I'm going to take a few minutes on. Excuse me. I've been a Microsoft guy since my hair was brown for a long time, and we were one of the first adopters of all the Microsoft software. So I've been using Microsoft Project for probably more than half my life at this point. It's a great tool for planning and estimation, not so great for tracking depending on your method of development. If you're in an agile type of project where you're allowing the developers to pick whatever tasks they want to work on from a bucket of tasks to create the components that they need, they might go in a different order than you've laid out on the project plan, and it turns it into a big ugly mess. If they're following a waterfall methodology, or you're laying out the plan in the project in the order that you want them to attack things, then it works beautifully, and it's really nice to track your project through here, and it shows you when you're ahead or behind of schedule and things like that. There's a lot of different project management tools out there, but for me, Microsoft Project's Gantt view, which we're looking at here, shows everyone what will be happening when, and allows us to clearly illustrate to the stakeholders the work that needs to be done and the amount of resources doing work on, and doing the work and the timeline. So on this screen, we have a Gantt chart, and the tasks are listed on the left hand side. And I don't know if you can see my mouse, but hopefully you can. Here's a list of tasks, and it also shows information on the scheduled start date, stop date, and then the duration. Gantt bars also show a couple of other things. It shows the resources over here of who's working on that task, and it could be more than one person. It shows relationships between the tasks, and the way they're laid out lets us look at it and know that, hey, these couple of tasks start together. Like if you look at the orange tasks here, we have several tasks that start at the same time, and when the first three actually stop at the same time too, and they have to all be completed before the next one. I think it says specify milestones is done. So the project plan will govern what tasks get done in what order, and who's doing what, and what relationship between the tasks. So in other words, if you wanted to paint a picture, you need to get the paint and get the canvas and set it up on the easel before you can start doing anything else. Then 4 or 5 different people can paint the picture if they want to. And that's the beauty of working with a Gantt chart, is you can see and allocate the resources, and it makes sense to everybody when it's done. What I like the best about this is that it can figure out the amount of hours to bill for a project, and this is how we come up with our estimate. Is we take the time to lay out the project, and then we decide what can be done in parallel, what needs to be done before the other, and those types of things. And we call those constraints. What constraints do we apply? And then we can ask Microsoft Project to calculate the amount of man hours and tell us what it's going to cost us. And then once we know our cost, we can go ahead and mark that up and come up with a sale price. And that's how it works. Agile development doesn't support relationships. It's again, it's a bucket of tasks, and the project manager dictates what items are attacked in what order usually. If the scope and requirements were done prior to the coding, there's a high level order to things that should be done that's kind of laid out in paper. But again, it's managed completely by the project manager, one sprint at a time. After each sprint is completed, the team will regroup and do a micro discovery and micro scope for the next sprint so that all the tasks are laid out for them to complete. So they're going to go through the same process that we do in that case, but they're not going to look at the whole project. They're just going to look at this section at a time, and they do a section at a time. And there's plus and minuses to doing that as well. The advantages is that it really lets you pivot quickly and change functionality and features on the fly. The bad side about that is it lets you pivot quickly and add features on the fly. And that means we're talking about scope creep. So we'll get into that in just a moment, but I want to continue talking. And I'm not saying Agile is a bad thing. Agile is very dependent on the project manager managing the project. It's a great way to work. It lets the developers have the autonomy to just pull the tasks that they want to do in the order that they want to do them out of a bucket and get them done. And then it gets assembled into the big application at the end. Some Agile project management applications use swim lanes to move tasks through a workflow so that the project manager can have an overview of progress to report to the stakeholder. And the screen that I have here is actually a project that we're working on that we do in an Agile fashion because the big project has already been done. We did it in Waterfall. Now we're kind of adding features in groups. So it's perfect for Agile, and I can show this screen to my client, and they know what's in progress, what's going on, and how things are going. Okay. So a couple of project management tips, okay? The biggest is additions and modifications take time too. Whether it's a cosmetic change, a logic change, additional functionality, expect to get billed for these items. And if you're on the development side, make sure you bill for these items. Meetings count as well. Don't forget to include time for testing, bug repair, documentation, and meetings. They happen. Unfortunately, we don't like them. We try to make them go as quickly as we can, but they do happen. They take time, and it is part of the development process. So make sure, all the project managers out there, make sure that you include time for these things in your project so that the client is not surprised at the end with an extra bill for things that weren't laid out. Anyone ever hear the term scope creep? I've already said it a couple of times, so I'll give you the real definition. Scope creep is adding unauthorized features or changes. When a user says, can it do this? Or when a user says, can we change this? The developer always says, of course we can. Yes, they want to please you. Of course we can do that for you. What the developer may fail to mention is that you're asking them to undo or redo programming with new or different functionality, which counts as billable work over and above the specs that we originally agreed to, right? We're adding more, we're changing things based on the agreed plan. It doesn't always mean it's going to cost more money, but what it should always mean is that it's going to take a little bit longer to deliver the software because it changes the test scripts, it changes some of the coding. We have to go back to that software development life cycle and update everything based on these changes. So the best thing to do to mitigate your risks here is to make sure that when changes pop up like this, and they do, and it's normal, it's not a fail or anything like that, we just don't know everything. And sometimes things come up in the middle of programming that make us ask questions that gets the client to say, oh yeah, I forgot to tell you that. So it's not bad or anything, but it's risks that you need to be aware of, and you can mitigate that risk by requiring a change order before the work is done. Tell your developer you need to know how long it's going to take, what's the cost, and what's the new delivery date for the project. Nobody likes surprises on their invoices. Nobody does. So I want to touch on a few other things that you may want to discuss with your development team about bugs and support questions to ask. And I got a couple that I'll just throw out there. And if you have some others, add them in the chat, because that's definitely things that we if you ran into support issues, let's talk about it, because I'd like to cover that and make sure everybody understands. So do you use an online issue tracking system? These are questions to ask your development team. Are you going to use an online issue tracking system? Will we all have access to it? And how does it work? What's the best form of communication? If I run into an issue, how do you want me to tell it to you? Do you want me to go to a issue tracking portal? Do you want me to send you an email? Do you want me to text you? What do you want me to do? What are the working hours for support? When can I expect a person to actually help me? What is the policy for critical issues and bug fixes found on weekends and holidays or after hours? What's the expected time to resolve issues? When is the issue part of the development process and not considered a bug? And I talked about that in the past, and this is something that I find that we need to constantly review with our clients, is that this was not part of the original plan, and it is billable work because we're making changes and modifications. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. It's when the issue is part of the development process and we're not done, we haven't rolled it out, and it hasn't been accepted yet, then if there's a bug, it's part of the development work to fix it and move on. If everybody goes through testing and the client does their acceptance and we roll it out and it's live software and something breaks, then it's a bug, and it should absolutely be held to be fixed under a support plan. So I hope that makes sense. And the other question you want to ask is, how often do you meet with the development team, and do you have direct access to discuss things with the actual developer? Important stuff to ask. Okay. There's a difference between development issues and production issues, like I'm talking about. Issues discovered during QA and prior to going live are part of the development process, and it's considered billable development time. We haven't rolled it out yet. It's usually not covered by standard support at this time because the software's still in development, and we haven't you haven't approved it, and it hasn't been released for public. Once it's released, like I said, it's a bug and we need to fix it. We need to take care of it ASAP because it's forward facing and we don't want the public to see a problem. This is also a good time to mention, it's a good time if you're developing software that's going to be used by the public, you should make sure you have a outlet for your users to let you know they ran into an issue. Okay. In our case, we usually have an about or help menu that says submit an issue, and it'll pull up our Issue Buddy support tracking system, and client can just enter in the issue, and our system distributes issues to every developer in the company so somebody can jump on it right away. But the idea is make sure that you have your method of communication down, like what I was saying on the last slide, so that when things pop up, and they will, it's part of the game. When things pop up, that your customer has a way to report the issue. Otherwise, they're going to get very frustrated. They're not going to come back to your site, and so on and so forth. And let me just mention, we're making our in-house issue tracking system, Issue Buddy, into a software application for public use. If you'd like to use Issue Buddy for your next project, reach out to me after this class, and we can get you set up as a beta test user. I'm looking for some good feedback and testimonials, so we'll set you up with a great deal. This is a system that we've been using for the last 20 years. We've just kind of modernized it so that we can actually sell it and make it an offering for the public. So if it's something you're interested in for your team or your external development team, reach out to me. I'll be happy to work something out with you because I really want to get it out there. Okay, so we went over a whole bunch. Let's put it all together so you can see how things are done correctly and from beginning to end. And I'm going to show you a case study with a real client of ours called My Used Car Buddy. I need to thank the owner, Chris, because this was a perfect project from start to finish. And it went so well because we followed the process outlined in my book, of course. we've implemented all the things that we've talked about so far, and then we completed the building and launch of the new software last year, and it's really doing well. So let me give you a quick view of everything, and I'll tell you quickly about his company. It's called My Used Car Buddy, and they do car inspections. So if you're looking to buy a used vehicle, he'd be the guy to call to go look at the vehicle and do a head to toe inspection on the car and give you a killer report to let you know whether to buy it or not. But when I met Chris, he was doing everything manually with paper and pencil, literally with a clipboard. Chris would spend his family times in the evenings after work, putting together the reports for inspections done from that day from his team of inspectors. And because everything was a manual paper-based process, so much time was wasted with Chris driving around to everybody's house to collect the pictures, to proof the data, and then he'd have to bring it all back and format it into a nice Word document and send it off to his customers. So each inspection was averaging him about 2 3/4 hours to finalize and get out the door. And it was just making him nuts because he's only one person, right? So it was the perfect automation was the perfect answer for him. And he came to us with this problem. We knew nothing about anything about what he did until we met him. And let me walk you through and tell you a little bit about what we did. So we started out by looking at his existing worksheet, and as you can see on the screen, this is the worksheet that the inspectors carried around with their clipboard, and they would use their cell phones to take pictures of the cars and when they found damage or anything like that. And Chris would use what we call quote unquote sneaker net, which means you have to walk over and get the stuff and pick it up and everything. So it was just terrible. But the output and the customers loved what he did, and it's a good business. So I'm so glad he came to us. From looking at the data sheet that they're filling out on this page, the previous page, we put together a database. And we always like to start with the database because we identify all the data elements that we need to track, whether it's the inspection points or the different categories of the inspection, the photos, and so on and so forth. It's a big database. There's lots of tables and there's lots of relationships between them, but I'm not going to go into that. I just want to show you that part of what we do in the scope is figure out what the database is going to look like. Once we do that, we start looking at the reports that he sends out, and we make sure that our database has all the information that goes out in Chris's reports. Kind of makes sense, right? So this all comes back to discovery. We went through all the paperwork together to understand what data needs to be stored, how it needs to be used, how to bring it all together to create the final report. And we call those the deliverables from his service, right? So once we figured the input and the output, we figured out what the workflow was going to be and how is it going to work with his inspectors and how are we going to notify them and what are we going to do to make sure that the work gets done. So we come up with those types of workflows. And again, this is all discovery stuff that we can do together to save some time and make sure that your development team gets the right information to start with. From there, we start building mock-ups. So we need to show the user what the screen is going to look like, but we don't want to write code yet. So we use a tool to do what we call black and white mock-ups that kind of look like a computer screen. It looks like what we're going to build, and it's the final part of the blueprints that let the customer visually see, feel, and touch what we're going to build for them. So like I said, we have our database design, we have our workflow. We now need to mock up the screens, and on this screen right here, it's a desktop screen, but we also had to do this for mobile. So there's additional programming involved when you need to go to a different type of screen and screen size. So it's something you need to be aware of as well. From there, we put together a project plan, and you can see this is our Gantt chart. We have right in the beginning, we can do the analysis and do the mobile review right at the same time. Okay. we can do certain things at the same time, and then other things need to come one after another. So what we've done here is we've built out a project plan, we've created a timeline, and when I present this to Chris, he knows that it's going to take, excuse me, X amount of time for each task and when it's going to be done, and even who's going to be doing it. Excuse me. So we also give a written timeline so that they understand, in a different form, here's the different modules that we need to do: web server setup, UI design, and other parts of the application, how long it takes to be done, and where do we stand in the project. So everything we presented to Chris, guess what? He actually signed off on the contract. He loved the scope and requirements. He felt super confident because he knew exactly what we were going to do. Nothing was left to chance. He knew the developers, who's going to do what when, and how it's going to look in the end. So let me show you what the final output looked like. Here's the web application on a big screen. And this is the dashboard, of course, that shows how many inspections are assigned for this user, and so on and so forth. We also had to do the same thing for their mobile application. So when the inspector actually goes out to inspect a car, we wanted to get rid of that paper and pencil and clipboard right away. So the right answer is we make this a mobile application so that they can do everything on their cell phone, including taking the pictures and attaching the pictures to the specific car and making sure everything comes out okay. Everything goes to a cloud-based system, so Chris is no longer driving around to everybody's house picking things up on SD cards and things like that. And once the inspector does the report, it goes to Chris. Now Chris just looks at it and reviews it, makes sure everything's right, and makes any adjustments. But he's not doing all this layout. He's not building this document in Word and so on and so forth. The final report, it's gorgeous. I wish I could show you the whole thing, but it didn't fit on the screen. But it's long. It's all the pictures of everything that's right about the car, everything that's wrong about the car. And I got to tell you, I used the service myself. Here's some other inspection points where he's looking at the tires and the depths of the tires. And, we're collecting all this data, and we had to do that. So at this time, I'd be happy to address any questions or comments that you have. And, go ahead and add any questions into the chat. I'm going to hang around until there's only a few people left to answer questions. But if we don't get to yours, we'll reach out to you directly and try to answer them for you. I told you about my book, and I told you about our masterclass workshop. Here's the links again. Go ahead and scan the code with your phone, or if you didn't get a chance to, just reach out to me through connecting with me on LinkedIn, please, and I'll be happy to give you the links. And the last link on the right is to set up a 20-minute call with me, so I can answer your questions directly and also discuss if there's a possibility that we can help you with your project. But I'm happy to hear from you. So if you'd like to reach out, go ahead and schedule a call, and we'll connect on Zoom, and we'll do a face-to-face, and hopefully I can answer your questions. Okay. James, I'm not able to see the screen, so do we have any questions? Wait. I'm looking now. Bear with me. Okay, I'm not seeing anything so far. Okay, so I will tell you what, if anybody wants to reach out to me, my email is mark@palmbeachsoftware.com. Website is palmbeachsoftware.com. I will leave the screen up for a little bit, but I'm going to let y'all go have lunch. Have a great day, and if you like my webinar, please leave us a review or tell me in the comments what I can do better. I'm always trying to do better, and I appreciate it. And we'll see you all soon. Thank you very much.